So
the next,
Because we took them the same year.
Correct.
So when we come back in February, there'll be joint minutes.
Okay, so,
We're just approving Pupil Services at this point.
okay.
and then any vote that you take tonight, Leanne, will you document?
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you.
So it's help me stay on task.
I like it. So it is 6:30, and we are opening up the meeting for Pupil Service Education. Right. So, for the last meeting, we just have the Pupil Services agenda to approve. Not the agenda, I'm sorry, the minutes to approve. Can I get a vote? Minutes, yes, 1, 0, 8, 4.
Okay, the next is updated Berks Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services contract. We approved one several months, I think in July, based on April rates that they have provided to us. In July, they sent an updated contract. They changed the rates after we had approved them. I was not aware that they had done that until they recently said, why are we not paying the rate that they had sent to us, but they never explained that they changed their rates. So this is an updated contract. They provide translating, sign language services for us, for our students. There's about several of them throughout the district. And they change the rates by $2 an hour for their regular services and for their extracurricular rates. That is going into effect after it is approved tonight.
Any discussion?
How much did it go up?
It went up $2 an hour.
Okay.
About how many hours do we, about the same, it'll be about the same?
We have 3 students that are actually full-time translators.
Any other questions from the board, from the committee? Anybody? Questions? Okay. You need a vote?
I do.
Yes. That's good.
The next is, this is a 3-year contract with PTS. We've been using them for many years for our occupational and physical therapy services. This contract actually goes effect in July. In the first year of the contract, the rate will go up $1 per hour for occupational and physical therapy. In the second year, it goes up 50 cents. And in the third year, there's no change. And that's very similar to the contract that we're currently using with them. They use that model. They're very efficient in the services that they provide.
What was it the first year? I missed that.
It was $1 the first year,
Okay.
50 cents the second year, and 0 increase the third.
If I recall correctly, I don't think they went up the last.
So in this contract, it's the same. The first year was $1, the
Oh, okay.
second year was 50 cents, and the third was 0. So this year, there was no change from last year.
Any questions? Or? Vote?
Yes.
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 Thank you. Right. Next, we do not need to vote on this. This is a presentation on, safe to say something. Okay, so safe to say something is a mandate that came out based last year. It actually started January 14th exactly. It is a system where individuals can put tips in via an app, phone, or online on their website. Students can report, adults can report. After we had put this in place, and for about 6 months, I gave you an update on the types of tips that we had been receiving. And I thought it'd be worthy, after a year of implementation, where are we? How many tips have we seen? And what types of supports do we have in place for students that have areas of need? Our core team are the folks that are listed up there. We have worked together, so when I say the core team, when these tips come in, all 5 of us are notified of those tips. We all receive a text and an email. If it is a life safety tip, then a phone call is made, and we go down the line. Like, I'm contacted first if I'm not available. Michael gets that phone call, and so forth. So I'll go into how those tips are processed. All right, so the first thing that happens is this tip comes in one of those 3 modes that I mentioned, and it goes into a call center in Harrisburg. There are folks that are trained at that call center to receive the tips. The person that receives the tip categorizes that. There's about 30 to 40 different kinds of categories. They classify it based on the information they receive. They will communicate with that tipster to gain as much information as possible. It is an anonymous system unless the person, the tipster, actually notes who they are. We do find out who the student is in that situation so that we can investigate the situation. The life safety tips are transmitted directly to us 24 hours a day, again by phone call. If it is a life safety tip, typically what occurs is I take the information from the call center, I get the demographic information for that student involved, and then the call center contacts the police, the appropriate police department, and the police visit the home and they investigate the situation. They will talk to the parents, they will talk to the students, and they will make recommendations if necessary to Valley Creek Crisis Center. If they are concerned about the students in imminent harm, they might recommend that the parent take the student to the hospital to be evaluated. If it is some type of a threat or something that they're concerned about the student, they might recommend that the student keep the student, to the parents to keep the student home and take the student to school directly the next day versus taking the bus. But that's the first line of intervention. If it is a non-life safety tip, meaning that we're not imminent harm, the entire team gets an email and a text, and they're transmitted to the district, and that's handled 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. during the day. And then we handle that at the building level, and I'll go to that next slide. So once I receive, and I'm kind of the key person that handles the tips, once I receive the tip, and whether it's life safety or non-life safety, after the direction has been given back to the call center, I inform the building, the principal, the core team that was mentioned, asking them to do some type of an evaluation with the student when they enter school. A suicide risk assessment, a violent risk assessment, and investigate the allegation if there is some type of concern that could be disciplinary in action. Based on those results, the parents are contacted and recommendations are made. Now, if it is something such as a building-wide or a district threat that we're concerned about, and we know that this is out on social media, or we're concerned it's going to be public, we will inform all parents in that particular building, or if it's something district-wide, there will be some memo that comes out from Dr. Scanlon. Otherwise, we handle it on a small-scale basis, and the students' parents are always notified of a threat that a tip has come in on their child, and so that they are made aware of it. But we do try to balance when we share that information with an individual parent versus when we share it with the entire building. If necessary, disciplinary measures are implemented. If it is something that we find, like, a student may make an allegation that they saw another student had marijuana, or was smoking marijuana. So if there is some type of allegation, there could be discipline that's involved in it. We always monitor those students. If there's mental health services, I will get into that a little bit later, what kinds of supports that we have that we can provide in the school.
Can I?
Sure.
The marijuana, the vaping, and that, are they just talking about when it's done on district property or in school?
No, it could be
It could
done
be
anywhere. So if they saw the student on the bus, or if they're out, they went to movies on a Saturday night and a student was vaping, so it doesn't have to be just during school. Now, from a disciplinary perspective, it would need to be, like in that situation, we wouldn't be able to discipline a student that had marijuana at the movies, but we certainly could investigate. We could do a drug and alcohol assessment on that student, and we'll notify the parents. We also then, after, as a follow-up for those life safety tips, Rick Thornton, who is our security supervisor, will go in and will contact the police and get an update from them as to their investigation. And then all the information that I get back from the school, from Rick and the police, goes into a disposition in the system. and I close that out. Any questions on the process of that we go through once we receive a tip? Now let me go through a little bit about the types of tips that we have received and how they're categorized. We received 225 tips. This went from January 14th to December 31st. 51 of those were life safety tips, meaning that in every one of those situations, the police were contacted and conducted a welfare check. 174 were considered non-life safety, and that was handled by each building along with our core team. This goes through, I won't read all of them to you, I will certainly show them there for you. The top tips that we have, and I'll go through another sheet. The majority are mental health issues that we receive. Sometimes we're aware of those students because the counselors may already be working with those students, and other times these are new to us. They're not things that we may not have been aware of. So we are able to find students that maybe were flying under our radar and were not known that may have had some concerns. These are the next areas. These are categories, I just want to emphasize, that are established by Safe to Say. We don't create the categories themselves. When we investigate, we're determining how credible those tips are. So example, when it is a school threat, it could be a student that made an offhand comment to another student on the bus, like tomorrow I'm going to go hurt all the ninth grade students in this particular class. Well, we need to investigate that situation. We take that very seriously, but when we actually do the investigation, so it's a very viable tip, we find that the student really did not have any intent on harming anyone. They might have been, frustrated over a situation, maybe that did not go well for them that day, and then we put the appropriate supports in place for that student. How can they better cope with what they're feeling, and what are better ways to be able to share how they're feeling than making those kinds of statements. So when I look at the school threats and the planned attacks, although they were valid tips, none of them took place, and none of them were considered to be credible and that something was going to be followed on. But we certainly followed through and investigated each one of those, as well as the weapons. In none of those situations where do we find weapons that students intended to do harm. When we break it down by building, elementary, Exton is the only elementary that actually has had some tips through the tip system. I do want to emphasize there are many ways that students we receive information about students. When students received the presentation on Safe to Say, and then there was an update last year and then an update this year, the first thing that we share with them is please go to a trusted adult. And let's identify who those trusted adults are within our buildings. And they spend some time over it and what kinds of things they might want to share with those trusted adults, the counselors, the psychologists, the principals and administration. Then we talk about this as being another option if they want to be able to put a tip in anonymous if they're concerned about someone. We do see that when you look at the buildings, that there are some more in the Pierce and Henderson feeder pattern that are going through the tip line. But I will say when we look at the amount of services or the types of concerns that we have for students in our district, they're pretty consistent in all of our buildings at the secondary level. The types of supports, the number of students receiving services. It just so happens that Pierce and Henderson are really utilizing the Safe to Say option to be able to share that. They also share with the counselors, but they feel very comfortable using this system. I broke down by month. And I think that we find that around the holidays, it's very stressful for students, and we do see that there is an increase. Obviously, when it went into place, most of the training took place in January and the early parts of February. So February and March were really, some high numbers, and it started to decrease, which is what we were told would occur when we went through the training. Over the summer, we only received a couple of tips. We did have someone in place, Candy Jakubowski is one of our intervention specialists at Henderson, and she was on call If we got tips, we were able to pay her for her time, and then she would do, if there was a suicide risk assessment that was needed, we would bring the students in, and she was able to make some recommendations for those students. So we did make sure there were supports available over the summer. We started to do some more trainings again in October for our students this year. Our new students in 6th grade, and really focused on our 9th grade students as they transition, because transitions is a difficult time for them. And we saw again some increases in the last couple of months in the number of tips that we received. But I want to go over a little bit of where we are when we have the types of services that we have in place for our students. This year, for the first year at our elementary level, we have 2 mental health specialists. They spend 1 day per week in each of the elementaries. I will tell you, at this point, they are full. That we could easily add, without hesitation, 2 more mental health specialists at our elementary level. And I think as we move down and make recommendations in future years, not next year, but probably in 21, 22, we'll look to add at that elementary level. They are working in groups. They're working individually with students. They're making recommendations if they need a higher level of care outside of the school setting. At this point, they've seen students for up to 90 days, so we're trying to, maybe if they are seen on a weekly basis, can they be seen every other week? If they're one individual, can they be seen in group? But we're trying to meet all the needs we have, but they are hopping at our elementary level. Our middle schools, we have a full-time mental health specialist at each of our middle schools, and they are very full as well. But this is our 2nd year of having that in place, and again, very successful meeting our students' needs. And they are a great resource within our buildings. Our high school, we have an intervention specialist at each of our buildings. They are all have master's degrees. Some are licensed professional counselors. They work with our students on an individual basis. They're kind of our first line. If they need supports that go beyond what they're able to provide, excuse me, we have a full-time mental health specialist at East via grant this year. We're piloting that. In our other 2 buildings, we actually contract services through some agencies, and we can go through parents' insurances and are able to provide those services within the high school setting. One of the roadblocks that has occurred in the past is where students were not able to access the services due to lack of transportation, being able to actually get to the therapist, so we're bringing the therapist to them. In 21-22, there will be a mental health specialist at each one of our high schools. That's being built in as we bring our mental health program back to our day program at, which is currently at the Mountain Center, will be brought back to our high school, so each high school will have its own program they're able to offer.
And
Yes.
Go
ahead.
I just wanted to ask, what impact do you think full-day kindergarten will have on the mental health needs of the elementary school? Maybe helpful, or maybe identical?
I think what's helpful is with their social emotional learning is a big part of their kindergarten day. When you have half-day program, there wasn't time to talk about peer interaction, and with the play that they have, it's teaching kids how to interact with one another. When there's conflict, how do you resolve it? In addition to that, we have the Second Step program that has in place now for about 5 years, if I'm remembering correctly. And that's teaching kids, if I'm feeling anxious, and they talk about, obviously very different in kindergarten than they would with a 5th grade student, what are coping skills? So we're teaching that. And with the full day program, they have ample opportunity to be able to teach and reinforce the skills they're learning in our Second Step program. I think all of that supports. Next year, we're moving Second Step into our middle school programs, starting that with most likely our 6th grade. And we'll talk about that in one of our future meetings, so that we can continue those kinds of supports. Because the middle school, that's a huge transition for our students. And they need the most support, I believe, in helping through that transition process. And they need not only the mental health after we've identified the problem, what are some things we can do proactively, and the Second Step is one of those measures.
So my question was just, how do most school districts have this amount and these different layers of mental health services, or are we ahead of the pack or behind the pack?
I'd say we're ahead of the pack.
Okay.
When we, and I don't mean to toot our own horn, but when we go to county meetings, I can tell you how many times Carol there has been contacted, our student services supervisor from other districts in our, kind of the Tri-County area. What are you doing? How are you doing it? how can you implement this? And she's often asked, and always does, we'll meet with them or talk to them about how we put some of these supports in place. I think other districts are recognizing the need for this. I know that Downingtown has added, like we had that grant with the one mental health specialist. They received a similar grant. They've been using those monies to put mental health specialists in. They had unfortunately 4 suicides last year, and they were looking for some additional types of supports. So I think districts are recognizing it, but I believe over the last at least 10, 12 years, what we've been putting in place gradually has been really supporting our students, and more than many of our other districts are able to
We're
do.
in year 6 of doing suicide and violent risk assessments, I think.
So districts have contacted us
Mhm.
prior to those risk assessments being required under Safe to Say. We were already doing that 4 years.
That's great. Isn't part of that under the PAYS report too?
Yes, and we'll talk about that. Those results will be coming out in late spring for the 2019 one, but we use those PAYS results to help drive what kinds of additional supports that we need based on the trends that we are seeing. And so I'm glad you raised that, because that's some of the data that we use when we were making the determination to put some of these types of supports in place.
When is that's coming up?
Probably by June, we'll have that data. The students took the PAYS in October, and that's a Pennsylvania Youth Survey. Okay, and that deals with mental health, drug and alcohol, items in the community, risks that are even in the home, and really gives us some really good data. And we had seen from the 2017, the biggest areas of growth were actually at the elementary level. Students coming into 6th grade, so we saw the impact was coming from that elementary, so the largest. Even though there were small numbers, the largest increases were coming in that 6th grade. So that's one of the reasons we have the mental health specialists at the middle school level now. So as I stated, we are going to be moving we do currently have a school-based mental health program at the Mountain Center. It's working very well. We believe that we can probably serve more students by moving that back to our high schools and intervene earlier. So over the course of starting now with the mental health specialist at East, and then over the course of the next 2 years, our goal is by 21, 22 to have that back at our high schools. I'm building that into the budget as we move
So we
forward.
have space for it back here.
Yes, I'm not sure exactly where, but we're working on that. Some buildings have a little bit more space than others, but we'll be able to have that credit recovery component of it and really intervene, I think, even academically much sooner than we've been able to do versus until students are failing.
So pretty isolated over there at the Mountain Center, correct? When there's no touch point with any of the extra,
Oh, no, they can participate,
They can come
absolutely.
back
We
here
bring
to
the
do
buses
that.
back to them to the high schools, and they can participate in extracurricular activities. There is constant communication with our high schools, with the intervention specialists as the kind of liaison for that, as well as the counselors and so forth. So they're reviewed on a quarterly basis to see whether or not they're ready to return. There are going to be some students that, by the sheer size of our district and some of the anxieties or supports that they need, may not be able to handle our high schools, and we'll have to look for programs for them. But for the vast majority, I think we can meet the needs in the buildings. So that's our goal. We have 2 other areas that we are able to get student information beyond the Safe to Say and some of the face-to-face options that are available within our buildings. And I'm going to ask Michael Wagner to talk about them because they really come through our technology. And the first is Content Keeper.
These 2 technologies share with you tonight, they precede the Safe to Say, so we've been doing this for a few years now. Content Keeper is our web filter, so obviously we have to comply with Children's Internet Protection Act and all internet activity is filtered. But in addition to performing filtering functions, it also provides a wide array of reports. And we have one report that's automated that runs every night at about 11:55, and and it gives us information about suspicious searches. So depending on time of the school year, whether we're on break, the reports can be rather brief or they can be rather lengthy. And I will say that the vast majority of line items in that report, when you look at it in context, it doesn't raise any concern. To Kill a Mockingbird will give me lots and lots of hits. I usually know what the social studies classes are. If they're looking at the gangs of the 1920s, you get a lot of Tommy guns and things like that. So, but it has flagged some kids who really were struggling. So we'll look at keyword searches include what you might imagine: suicide, cutting, guns. We'll look at terms that might indicate a student struggling and considering some type of self-harm. We'll also take a look at search terms that may give us an indication that the student is engaging in something that is illegal or trying to bypass our filters, or looking at ways they can disrupt network operations. So we look at a wide variety of things beyond, I guess, the scope of safe to say. When we receive something that we can't seem to put into a context that explains it, and most of it just by observation we dismiss, we then forward that to the principal, and principal will usually assign that out based on whether it looks like a mental health concern or a disciplinary type of issue. And then we were able to go back in and pull an individual student user report that shows all internet activity, not just those that hit those trigger words. And we can do that for 1 day, 1 week, a month, if we need to. So we can get pretty detailed. We generally don't do that very often, but we can if necessary. And I guess we can go to the next slide. SysCloud. The second technology we use is actually a cloud-based solution. The Content Keeper is on-prem. We have that here, and all data goes through the content filter, whether the student's on campus or off campus, provided they're using one of our pieces of equipment. SysCloud is a service, and what it does is it scans Google Schools cloud applications, specifically student email and Google Docs. So basically it looks at the Google Drive and email. And again, it's looking at the same thing that the content filter is looking for in general. But these are things that students may be storing or emailing back and forth. We don't actively, peer into student, into student accounts or student drives. This is all automated. It follows its algorithms, and when it has an alert, it will actually email me. It emails Rick Thornton, and then we will go and take a look. Again, same thing. You look at something in context. You just simply say, well, it's a blunt instrument. It's a dumb machine. It doesn't really get the nuance and the context. But we had 4 today that were actionable this morning, so we were pretty busy. So sometimes it really does hit on what would be inappropriate behavior or behavior that might, or writing that may raise some concerns in the form of an email or a shared document. But again, in those cases, students writing an essay and maybe a little bit on the darker side, and the machine had really no appreciation for that. It just alerts us because of the presence of certain keywords and phrases. So those are the two tools that we use. Again, both tools really have, on occasion, given us the information we needed to intervene and to help kids. And that's really the purpose for it.
What's a you think?
Acceptable use policy. It's a board policy for staff and for students. There's an AUP for staff and AUP for students that basically outlines what would be considered appropriate, acceptable use of the computer network, computer-related equipment, good ethical internet behavior.
What was the acronym on the previous one?
SIPA,
Uh-huh.
Children's Internet Protection Act. It's federal law. Essentially, among other things, in order for us to be eligible for federal, E-rate program and other federal monies, we have to show that we actively filter internet, the internet for students, internet content for students. You know, again, a blunt instrument, not perfect by far, but we comply.
So our goal, I'm sorry,
Are the students aware that they're being?
I would say yes, because one of the things they were doing early on was one student wasn't looking, another student might type something into a Google search that he knew would trigger our, so I would say,
middle school.
Yeah, little middle school trickery. I would venture to say that many do. I don't know that all do, but I suspect most do.
So do you see anything changing with safe to say something?
No, I don't, and I know there's certainly a large number of tips that we got, but I'm actually pleased with that, because what that says to me is we have our resources within our buildings, we have obviously these programs that are able to catch students, but here's another way that we're finding students that we may not have known about. And so we're able to put some supports in place for them so that we can help them moving forward, because we want to find these students. Because if we don't know what their concerns are and what they might be, worrying about or suffering without us being aware. So I'm pleased. I think we'll see similar types of results. It'll ebb and flow, based on the time of the year. I would think it'll increase again towards the spring as kids get towards summer, and there's a lot of anticipation and anxiety around that, or graduation, things along those lines. It'll slow down over the summer, and then it'll come back up.
It'll be interesting to see next year.
Sure, and I can certainly just do this like on an annual basis, like in January.
That would be good.
Are there like annual assemblies for the schools where the kids get a refresher on this?
Yes, so when we rolled it out last year, we did 6th through 12th grade. We did a parent presentation, and we really kind of made sure everybody was aware. It also goes along with the Sandy Hook Promise program and some of the other initiatives that we have in our secondary building. So they might have, each building kind of did it their own way. They might have combined it, or they did it as a separate presentation. There was a scripted PowerPoint that could be used. And then this year we really focused on 6th grade and 9th grade. Buildings, again, kind of varied that. Sometimes they went into the health classes, sometimes they did it by the whole grade level, but they did do a refresher on that.
Look, we don't have this on this report here. It's not, is it on?
What?
The slideshow.
This is revised.
Remember, we revised it, so it'll go on your meeting tonight.
Okay.
Yep,
So we
absolutely.
can go back to it for reference.
Are there any other questions about the presentation?
Any other questions for me? No. Any questions? Any questions? No questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our part of the meeting.